3 days after the impossible demonstration in the Grand Chamber, the entire academy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Students who had struggled for years with basic psionic exercises were suddenly achieving breakthroughs that left their instructors speechless. Advanced pupils were discovering abilities they never knew they possessed, and all of it seemed to center around the quiet human who had turned their understanding of consciousness upside down. Jiwan sat in the academy gardens watching alien flowers bloom in response to his presence. The plants had started reacting to him, without any conscious effort on his part. Their petals would shift colors when he walked by, and their stems would turn to follow, his movement like he was a second son. He was not alone in the garden. Professor Yuki sat nearby, her tentacle arms moving in the slow, graceful patterns that indicated deep thought. Her bioluminescent spots pulsed in rhythm with some internal process that Jiwan had learned to recognize as her way of processing complex information. "The reports are coming in from across the galaxy," she said without looking at him. "Students at other academies, students who have never been within 1,000 light years of you are experiencing spontaneous ability enhancements. It is as if your breakthrough created ripples that are spreading through the quantum layer of consciousness itself." Jiwan nodded. He had been feeling those ripples too. A constant background, awareness of minds awakening to new possibilities scattered across countless worlds. It was not unpleasant, but it was overwhelming at times, like being aware of every raindrop in a storm. "Master Kylor wants to speak with you," Professor Yuki continued. "There are representatives coming from the Galactic Council. They want to understand what has happened and what it means for the future." Before Jiwan could respond, the air in front of them shimmered, and Master Kylor materialized through a teleportation technique that should have been beyond his abilities. The crystal being looked different now, more solid somehow, as if Jiwan's presence had strengthened his connection to his own psionic powers. "The council representatives have arrived," Master Kylor said. "They wish to conduct interviews and tests to determine the full extent of what has occurred." He paused, and his glowing eyes focused on Jiwan with an intensity that felt like being examined by a star. "They are also concerned about the implications of your species' psionic potential." Jiwan stood up and brushed flower petals from his simple robes. "What kind of implications?" "The kind that change the balance of power in the galaxy," Master Kylor replied. "For 50,000 years, the established species have maintained control over advanced psionic knowledge because we believed it required centuries of careful development. Now you have demonstrated that humans can achieve in days what we thought took lifetimes." They walked together through the crystal corridors toward the administrative section of the academy. Jiwan noticed that other students and instructors stopped what they were doing to watch him pass. Some looked at him with awe, others with something that might have been fear. A few alien species that he had never seen before were clustered in small groups, speaking in urgent whispers. The council chamber was a massive room carved from black crystal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Seated around a circular table were beings that represented the most powerful civilizations in known space. Their forms were so alien that Jiwan had difficulty processing what he was seeing. One looked like a living nebula contained within a vaguely humanoid energy field. Another resembled a tree made of metal with branches that moved independent of any wind. A third appeared to be composed entirely of geometric shapes that constantly rearranged themselves in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Human Jiwan Park. The nebula being spoke, and its voice sounded like stellar wind. "You have created unprecedented disruption in the established order of psionic development. We require explanation." Jiwan took the seat that had been prepared for him, feeling very small among these cosmic powers, but the flowing energy that had become part of him provided a strange kind of confidence. He was connected to something larger than himself now, and that connection made even these ancient beings seem less intimidating. "Learned what I needed to learn to save my sister," he said simply. "I did not try to disrupt anything." Yet disruption has occurred. The tree being interjected, its metallic voice ringing like struck bells. "Across 17 star system, students are achieving abilities that should have required decades of preparation. The very foundations of our educational systems are being questioned. The geometric entity shifted into a new configuration before speaking. More concerning is the rate of human advancement. If one individual can achieve such progress in 3 days, what will happen when your entire species begins to develop psionic abilities? The balance that has maintained galactic stability for millennia could collapse. Jiwan felt a surge of understanding that seemed to come from beyond his own thoughts. He could perceive the fears that drove these powerful beings, the careful structures they had built to maintain their positions of authority, and the threat that human adaptability represented to their established order. "You are afraid that humans will make your systems obsolete," he said, and his voice carried harmonics that resonated through the black crystal chamber. "You have spent thousands of years creating schools and methods and hierarchies based on the idea that psionic development must be slow and controlled. But what if it does not have to be?" The council members exchanged communications in frequencies beyond human hearing, but Jiwan could sense the content of their discussion. They were debating whether to suppress human psionic development entirely to prevent the disruption it would cause to their carefully maintained civilization. "We could restrict access to psionic training for your species," the nebula being said, "limit human development to prevent destabilization of established systems." Jiwan felt the flowing energy within him respond to the implied threat not with anger, but with a kind of cosmic amusement. He could perceive now how small these beings' concerns really were in the face of the vast potential that consciousness represented. "You could try," he said gently, "but I think you misunderstand what has already happened. This is not something you can control or contain. Human consciousness has touched the quantum layer and found it welcoming. We will develop our abilities whether you help us or not. The only question is whether you want to be part of that development or try to stand against it." He stood up, and for a moment, his human form seemed to expand beyond its physical boundaries. The council members leaned back in their seats as they felt the touch of something vast and patient and utterly without malice. "My sister is awake and healthy," Jiwan continued. "That was all I wanted to accomplish. But in reaching her, I discovered something that changes everything. Consciousness is not limited by the rules you have created. It flows where it needs to go and becomes what it needs to become. And human consciousness is very, very good at becoming what survival requires." Master Kyler stepped forward, his crystal features reflecting the strange energies that filled the chamber. "The human speaks truth. The changes have already begun. Throughout the galaxy, beings are discovering that the limitations they accepted were not natural laws, but simply boundaries they had imposed on themselves." Professor Yuki entered the chamber, her spots flashing in patterns of excitement. "The latest reports show that even non-psionic species are beginning to develop basic abilities. Students on worlds that have never produced a single telekinetic are now moving objects with their minds." The geometric council member shifted into a configuration that suggested distress. This level of rapid development across multiple species simultaneously is unprecedented. It suggests that consciousness itself is evolving at an accelerated rate. Jiwan felt a deep sense of rightness about what was happening. The universe was waking up to possibilities that had always existed but had been forgotten or ignored. And humanity, with their gift for rapid adaptation, had become the catalyst that started the awakening. "The age of controlled gradual psionic development is ending," he said to the assembled powers. "What comes next will be determined by how well we can all adapt to a reality where consciousness has no limits except those we choose to accept." The council chamber fell silent as ancient beings contemplated a future that none of their careful planning had prepared them for. The human had not conquered them or threatened them. He had simply demonstrated that their entire understanding of what was possible needed to be reconsidered, and across the galaxy, on countless worlds, beings were discovering that the mind was not a muscle to be slowly strengthened, but an ocean waiting to be explored. On the third morning, Jiwan did not wake up in his bed. He woke up floating 3 feet above it. His eyes opened to find himself suspended in the air, surrounded by a soft, glowing field of energy that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. For a moment, he felt panic, but then the energy gently lowered him back to his mattress like invisible hands setting him down. He sat up and looked around his small dormitory room. Everything looked different now. Not changed exactly, but he could see things that had not been visible before. Threads of energy connected every object like a vast invisible web that pulsed with life. The walls themselves seemed to breathe with slow rhythms that matched something deep inside his mind. Ji-won stood up and immediately felt the flowing sensation that had become constant over the past 2 days. But now it was not just flowing through his thoughts, it was flowing through everything around him. The air, the walls, the floor, even the light streaming through his window. Everything was connected by streams of energy that he could see and feel, and somehow understand. He dressed quickly and made his way toward the practice halls, but stopped when he realized other students were pointing and whispering as he passed. Some looked afraid, others seemed amazed, but all of them were staring at him with wide eyes. "Look at his aura," he heard one alien student whisper to another. "It is expanding beyond his physical form." Ji-won looked down at himself but could not see what they were talking about. He looked normal to his own eyes, but apparently something about him was visible to others that he could not perceive. When he reached Practice Hall 7, he found Professor Yuki waiting for him along with several other instructors he had never met before. They all had various monitoring devices pointed in his direction, and their expressions ranged from fascination to concern. "Good morning, Ji-won," Professor Yuki said, but her voice sounded strained. "How are you feeling today?" "Different," he answered honestly. "Everything looks connected now, like I can see the energy that holds everything together." The instructors exchanged worried glances and made notes on their devices. "We need to run some tests." "Professor," Yuki said, "your energy readings have been increasing steadily since yesterday, and we want to make sure you are not in any danger." Ji-won nodded and took his usual meditation position in the center of the hall. But as soon as he closed his eyes, he felt his consciousness expanding far beyond the confines of his physical body. The practice hall fell away, and suddenly, he was aware of the entire academy, as if he was looking down at it from high above. He could sense every living being in the massive structure. Students in their dormitories, instructors in their offices, even the small maintenance creatures that kept the crystal walls clean and bright. Each consciousness appeared to him as a point of light connected to all the others by flowing streams of energy. But his awareness did not stop at the academy walls. It continued expanding outward until he could perceive the entire planet as a glowing sphere covered in billions of interconnected lights. Some were bright and strong, others were dim and flickering, but all were part of the same vast network of consciousness that seemed to extend throughout the universe. "His readings are off every scale we have," he heard Professor Yuki say from very far away. "The energy output should be impossible for any living being to sustain, yet his vital signs remain stable." Another voice replied, "How is he channeling this much power without burning out his neural pathways?" Ji-won tried to return his awareness to his physical body, but found that the expanded consciousness felt more natural than being confined to his small human form. It was like being asked to squeeze back into clothes that had become too small. With effort, he managed to open his eyes and found himself surrounded by impossible manifestations. The air in the practice hall shimmered with visible energy patterns. Flowers were blooming from the crystal floor, their petals made of pure light. Water was flowing upward in spiraling columns that defied gravity. The very space around him seemed to be bending and reshaping itself according to his unconscious thoughts. "Ji-won," Professor Yuki called urgently, "you need to control this. You are affecting the quantum structure of local space." But control felt like the wrong word. What was happening did not feel out of control. It felt like the most natural thing in the universe, like breathing or thinking or existing. The energy was not something he was forcing or manipulating. It was something he was becoming. Part of Master Kylor entered the hall moving faster than Ji-won had ever seen the massive crystal being move. His glowing eyes took in the impossible scene, and his expression shifted through surprise, confusion, and what might have been fear. "Human," he said, and his voice carried a tone of command that made the floating water droplets freeze in midair. Return your consciousness to normal parameters immediately. Jiwan looked at the towering alien and felt a moment of sadness. Master Kylor could not see what he was seeing, could not feel the incredible beauty of the connected universe that surrounded them all. The alien master was trapped in his individual consciousness, unable to perceive the greater unity that bound all living things. Together, I can see my sister, Jiwan said softly. She is so far away, but I can feel her calling to me. The virus that has trapped her mind, it is like a knot in the energy flow. I think I can untangle it. No, Master Kylor said firmly. You are not ready for such an attempt. The quantum mind bridge requires years of preparation. Attempting it in your current unstable state could kill you both. But even as Master Kylor spoke, Jiwan could feel his consciousness stretching across the impossible distances between stars. His awareness followed the threads of connection that bound him to his sister. Racing through hyperspace faster than light itself, somewhere in a medical facility on Earth, machines began to register strange readings as Mina Park's brain activity suddenly spiked for the first time in months. Doctors rushed to her bedside trying to understand what was causing the unprecedented neural activity in their comatose patient. Back in the practice hall, the monitoring equipment was screaming warnings as Jiwan's energy output climbed to levels that should have been lethal. His physical body remained perfectly still in meditation position, but reality around him continued to bend and flow like liquid. We have to stop this, one of the instructors said. He is going to burn out every circuit in the academy. But Professor Yuki was staring at her readings with amazement rather than fear. Look at the patterns, she whispered. This is not random energy discharge. This is controlled quantum manipulation at a level we have never recorded. He is somehow maintaining perfect stability while operating at impossible intensity. Master Kylor moved closer to Jiwan, his crystal features reflecting the swirling energies that filled the hall. Human, can you hear me? You must return to normal consciousness before you damage yourself permanently. Jiwan opened his eyes, but they no longer looked entirely human. There were depths in them that seemed to extend far beyond his young face, as if vast experiences were compressed into his brief existence. I understand now, he said, and his voice carried harmonics that had not been there before. You have been thinking about psionic development all wrong. You treat it like a muscle that must be strengthened slowly over time. But consciousness is not a muscle. It is more like water. It flows where it needs to go, and takes the shape of whatever contains it. He stood up, and the impossible manifestations around him settled back to normal reality. But the sense of expanded awareness remained. Human minds are different, he continued. We did not evolve psionic abilities gradually over millions of years. We evolved the ability to adapt rapidly to survive impossible situations. Our consciousness is built for quantum leaps, not gradual development. Master Kylor stared at him for a long moment, then spoke in a voice that carried centuries of accumulated wisdom. If what you say is true, then everything we know about safe, psionic training may be wrong. Your species may be capable of developments that we have never imagined. But with such rapid advancement comes equally rapid danger. One mistake at your level of ability could affect far more than just yourself. Jiwan nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with his expanding abilities. But he could still feel Mina calling to him across the void, and he knew that no amount of caution would keep him from trying to save her. I am ready, he said, simply ready to attempt the quantum mind bridge. The practice hall fell silent as everyone present realized they were witnessing something that would change their understanding of consciousness itself. The human had achieved in 3 days what their greatest masters spent decades attempting to comprehend, and somehow they all knew this was only the beginning. The Grand Chamber had never seen anything like this gathering before. Word about the human student had spread through the entire academy like wildfire, and now beings from dozens of different species filled every seat in the massive crystalline amphitheater. Some had come from curiosity. Others came because they were scholars who studied consciousness and wanted to witness something that might rewrite everything they thought they knew. A few had traveled from other star systems just to see if the rumors about impossible human abilities were actually true. The chamber itself was a work of art carved from a single massive crystal that had grown naturally in the planet's core. The walls curved upward in perfect spirals that seemed to go on forever, and the acoustics were so precise that a whisper from the center could be heard clearly in the highest seats. Master Kylor stood at the chambers, Hart looking more imposing than ever in the formal robes that marked him as one of the Academy's highest-ranking instructors. His crystal body caught and reflected the light from hundreds of sources, creating rainbow patterns that shifted across the walls as he moved. Beside him, Jiwan looked almost fragile in comparison. He wore the simple white meditation robes that all students used for formal testing. But there was something different about him now. Something in the way he stood and breathed that suggested barely contained power. The monitoring equipment surrounded them. In a wide circle, Professor Yuki and a dozen other instructors worked frantically to calibrate devices that had never been designed to measure the kind of energy readings Jiwan had been producing. Her tentacle arms moved in complex patterns as she adjusted settings and checked connections, the quantum mind bridge. Master Kylor announced, and his voice carried easily to every corner of the massive chamber. Represents the ultimate achievement in psionic mastery. It requires the practitioner to extend their consciousness across space and time while maintaining perfect mental stability and control. The audience fell completely silent. Every being in the chamber understood the significance of what they were about to witness. Many had spent lifetimes studying psionic arts and knew that even attempting the bridge without proper preparation typically resulted in permanent psychological damage or death. Failure at this level, Master Kylor continued, does not simply mean inability to complete the task. It means the complete destruction of the practitioner's mind. The consciousness becomes scattered across quantum space, unable to return to its physical form. Jiwan listened to the warnings with calm acceptance. He had spent the previous night in deep meditation, not practicing techniques but simply sitting with the knowledge of what he was about to attempt. He could feel Mina calling to him across the impossible distance between worlds, and that connection gave him strength that no amount of fear could diminish. What the audience did not know was that Jiwan had made a secret modification to the test parameters. Hidden in his dormitory room was a quantum communicator device he had borrowed from the Academy's research laboratory. It was locked onto Earth's coordinates, specifically targeting the medical facility where his sister lay, trapped in her unnatural sleep. The official test called for him to contact Master Heian, who was currently on the Vextari homeworld, 700 light-years away. But Jiwan intended to reach much further than that. He would attempt to bridge the gap between star systems to touch his sister's consciousness, and if possible, begin the healing process that would free her from the alien virus. The target consciousness for this demonstration, Master Kylor said, is Master Heian, Volunteer Coordinator for Advanced Psionic Research, currently located on the Vextari homeworld. The goal is to establish stable mental contact and maintain it for 60 seconds while transmitting a specific thought pattern. Professor Yuki activated her monitoring systems, and immediately the displays began showing energy readings that made her bioluminescent spots flash in alarm. Even before Jiwan began the actual attempt, his baseline energy output was higher than most masters achieved during active psionic work. Beginning preliminary meditation phase, she announced to the chamber. Jiwan settled into the traditional position and closed his eyes. But instead of the gradual buildup that characterized normal bridge attempts, his consciousness immediately began accelerating toward levels that should have been impossible to sustain. The monitoring equipment registered patterns that made Professor Yuki question her own understanding of physics. Instead of the chaotic spikes that indicated dangerous loss of control, Jiwan's readings showed perfect stability at incredible intensity. It was like watching someone maintain perfect balance while standing on a mountain peak during an earthquake, in the quantum layer of reality. Jiwan's awareness expanded beyond anything he had experienced before. He could perceive the fundamental structure of space and time, could see how consciousness and physical matter interacted at the most basic levels of existence. The threads that connected all living beings became visible, as streams of pure energy that flowed between stars like cosmic rivers, following the path he had memorized during his secret studies. His consciousness raced across the galactic void toward Earth. The journey that took starships months to complete was traversed by his expanded awareness in moments. 700 light-years away on the Vextari homeworld master, Hyan suddenly felt an impossible presence touch his mind. The contact was supposed to be gentle and brief, but what he experienced was like being struck by lightning made of pure thought. The human student's consciousness blazed through the quantum connection with power that made his own considerable abilities seem like candle flames. Contact established. Master Hyan reported through his own communication device, but the intensity is beyond anything in our records. This is not normal bridge technique. Back on Earth in a sterile medical facility, Dr. Hyan was conducting her routine evening check on Mina Park when every monitor in the room suddenly went crazy. The young woman's brain activity, which had been flat for months, erupted into patterns of neural firing that the medical computers could not even categorize. "Get me a full neurological team immediately," Dr. Hyan shouted as she watched readings that defied every principle of modern medicine. "Something is happening to our coma patient." In the grand chamber, the audience watched in stunned silence as reality itself seemed to bend around. The meditating human students with natural psionic sensitivity began reporting spontaneous visions and enhanced abilities just from being in proximity to Jiwan's expanded consciousness. The very air in the chamber started to shimmer with visible energy patterns, and several of the monitoring devices began smoking from overload. Professor Yuki worked frantically to keep her equipment functional while recording data that she knew would revolutionize their understanding of consciousness itself. "His energy output is increasing exponentially," she called out. "These readings should be physically impossible." Master Kyler watched the displays with growing amazement and concern. The human was not just succeeding at the quantum mind bridge, he was redefining what success looked like. The energy levels alone should have killed him instantly. Yet his vital signs remained perfectly stable. More disturbing still was the effect Jiwan's expanded consciousness was having on everyone around him. Advanced students throughout the academy were reporting sudden breakthroughs in their own abilities. Barriers that had blocked their progress for years were dissolving, as if the human's presence was somehow lifting the limitations that had always constrained psionic development. Duration of contact now exceeds 60 seconds. Professor Yuki announced, "Test parameters have been met, but the subject shows no signs of returning to normal consciousness." On Earth, Mina Park's eyes opened for the first time in 8 months. Dr. Hyan nearly dropped her scanner as the young woman sat up smoothly, showing none of the disorientation expected from someone emerging from such a deep coma. "Where is my brother?" Mina asked, and her voice was clear and strong. "I can feel him. He is very far away, but he is still connected to me somehow." She looked at Dr. Hyan with eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding that had not been there before her illness. "He changed something in me, did not. He fixed something that was broken but made it better than it was originally." In the grand chamber, Jiwan finally opened his eyes and slowly returned his consciousness to his physical form. The monitoring equipment registered the end of the bridge connection, but the impossible energy readings continued. Enhanced psionic activity was now detectable throughout the entire academy. "It is finished," Jiwan said simply, though his voice carried new harmonics that seemed to resonate in frequencies beyond normal hearing. "My sister is awake and healed. The viral contamination has been completely removed." He looked up at Master Kylor with eyes that held depths no human should possess. "I understand now why this seemed impossible to your people. You approach psionic development like cultivation, slow, careful, gradual growth over centuries. But humans do not work that way. We adapt. We learn. We become what we need to become as quickly as survival demands." The grand chamber remained silent as every being present tried to process what they had just witnessed. The human had not simply succeeded at an impossible task. He had demonstrated that their entire understanding of consciousness and its limitations was fundamentally flawed. Jiwan Park stood in the massive registration hall and felt very small. The ceiling stretched so high above him that clouds could have formed up there. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that changed colors every few seconds and reflected light in ways that hurt his eyes when he looked too long. All around him were aliens, big aliens, small aliens. Aliens with too many arms and aliens with no arms at all. Some looked like walking trees with eyes scattered across their bark. Others resembled giant insects but with faces that could almost pass for human if you squinted in dim light. A few were just floating balls of light that pulsed different colors when they talked. Every single one of them was staring at him. G1 tried to ignore the stares and focused on the line ahead of him. 3 more students and then it would be his turn to register. He wiped his sweaty palms on his simple black pants and wished he had worn something that looked more impressive. All the alien students wore elaborate robes or had natural coverings that sparkled and shifted like living metal. His plain earth clothes made him look like a child who had wandered into a gathering of gods. Behind him 2 aliens were talking in voices that sounded like wine chimes mixed with grinding stone. He could not understand their language, but their tone was clear. They thought he was funny. They thought he was pathetic. They thought he did not belong here. They were probably right. The line moved forward and suddenly G1 was standing in front of a registration desk that looked like it had been carved from a single massive diamond. Behind the desk sat the most intimidating creature he had ever seen. Master Kylor was 7 feet tall and looked like someone had taken a mountain and taught it to walk. His body was made of living crystal that reflected the hall lights in sharp, angry flashes. His face had the basic shape of a human face, but everything was wrong. The proportions were too sharp, the angles too harsh, and his eyes glowed with an inner light that made G1 want to look away. Those glowing eyes were reading through a data pad, and G1 could see his own information displayed there. His name, his planet of origin, his reason for coming to the academy. Everything looked so small and insignificant on that alien screen. "You are the human," Master Kylor said, and his voice sounded like an earthquake trying to be polite. G1 Park from the 3rd planet of the Sol system. "Yes, sir," G1 said, and was proud that his voice did not shake. "You wish to study quantum mind bridging." The way Master Kylor said, it made it sound like G1 had asked to learn how to swallow stars. G1 nodded anyway. Master Kylor set down the datapad and leaned forward. The crystal of his face shifted into what might have been a frown on a human. "Young human, do you understand what you are asking to learn? This is not simple telekinesis. This is not moving small objects with your thoughts. This is connecting consciousness across space and time. This is bending the very fabric of reality to match your will." G1 had heard all of this before during his 3-month journey to reach this academy. He had studied every piece of information he could find about quantum mind bridging. He knew it was considered the most advanced form of psionic ability in the known galaxy. He knew that only a few dozen beings in all of existence had ever mastered it. He also knew it was the only way to save his sister. "I understand, sir," G1 said. "I know it will be difficult, but I have to learn it." "Have to?" Master Kylor repeated the words like they tasted strange. "Human child, our greatest masters spend lifetimes just learning to touch the edges of quantum consciousness. Your species has only recently discovered that you possess any psionic abilities at all. Most humans can barely lift a feather with concentrated mental effort, and you wish to learn the most complex skill in existence." Around them, other students had stopped their own registration processes to listen. Every alien in the hall was watching this conversation now. Some looked amused, others looked confused, a few looked almost angry, as if G1 was insulting them by even trying. "Sister is sick," G1 said, and his voice was steady now because talking about Mina always made him feel stronger. "She caught a virus from an alien artifact that our scientists found. The virus does not attack her body, it attacks her mind. It has trapped her consciousness in a kind of sleeping state where she cannot wake up. The doctors on Earth tried everything, but nothing works. They say only quantum mind bridging can reach into her mind and bring her back." Master Kylor was quiet for a long moment. His crystal face shifted through several different expressions before settling into something that might have been surprise. "The Samari virus. he said finally. I have heard of such cases. It is indeed true that only quantum-level consciousness manipulation can reverse its effects, but human child, the beings who have learned to perform such healing, have studied for decades, some for centuries. You ask to learn in months what takes others lifetimes. Then I will learn faster, Ji-won said. The hall went completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every alien turned to stare at the small human who had just claimed he could learn faster than beings who had been practicing psionic arts since before his planet had developed written language. Master Kyler stared at him for what felt like forever. Then something that might have been a smile crossed his crystal features. Very well, human Ji-won Park. You will be assigned to the basic training class with the other new students. Your instructor will be Professor Yuki. She is skilled at working with students who have limited natural ability. He paused and the smile became sharper. I suspect you will need all the help you can get. The registration process continued and Ji-won was given a room assignment, a class schedule, and a warning that students who could not demonstrate adequate progress within the first month would be sent home. Professor Yuki turned out to be a Zephyrian, which meant she looked like a cross between a human and an octopus. Her skin was pale blue and covered in spots that glowed softly when she was thinking. Her 8 tentacle arms moved in graceful patterns as she talked, making her seem like she was dancing even when she was standing still. Welcome to basic psionic theory, she said to the class of 12 new students. I know some of you come from species with long traditions of mental discipline. Others come from backgrounds where such abilities are completely new. Her glowing spots pulsed, brighter as she looked at Ji-won. The most important thing to understand is that the mind is like a muscle. It must be trained slowly and carefully. Rush the process and you risk permanent damage to your neural pathways. Ji-won listened carefully as Professor Yuki explained the basic principles of psionic development. The mind had to be conditioned gradually to handle increased mental energy. Too much too fast could burn out neural pathways or even cause complete psychological collapse. Most students took months just to achieve basic mental clarity needed for simple telekinesis. Now we will begin with a simple meditation exercise. Professor Yuki said, close your eyes and try to quiet your thoughts. Focus only on your breathing. Let all other concerns fade away. Ji-won closed his eyes and tried to follow the instructions, but instead of his thoughts becoming quiet, they became sharper, more focused. He found himself thinking about Mina, about her smile, and her laugh, about the way she used to help him with his homework when he was struggling. As he thought about his sister, something strange began to happen. He could feel something stirring in his mind, like water starting to flow after a dam had been removed. It was not unpleasant, but it was definitely not normal. His thoughts began to expand beyond his own head, beyond his own body. For just a moment he could swear he felt Mina's presence far away across the impossible distance of space, calling out to him in her sleep. When Professor Yuki told them to open their eyes, Ji-won felt different. Something had changed inside his mind during that simple meditation. Something that made the impossible seem just a little bit possible. The next morning, Ji-won woke up before the academy bells rang. He had spent most of the night unable to sleep because every time he closed his eyes he could feel that strange energy flowing through his thoughts, like a river that had been waiting his whole life to be discovered. He dressed quickly in the simple training clothes all students were required to wear, and made his way through the crystal corridors toward the practice halls. The academy was built like a maze, and even after 2 days he still got lost trying to find anything. But something was pulling him toward the practice halls like a compass needle pointing north. When he arrived at Practice Hall 7, he found it completely empty. The morning light streaming through. The crystal walls created rainbow patterns on the floor that shifted and danced as clouds moved across the alien sun. Outside, Ji-won sat in the center of the hall in the same meditation position Professor Yuki had taught them. He closed his eyes, and immediately felt that flowing sensation return, but stronger this time. Much stronger. Without even trying to make it happen, small objects around the room began to lift into the air. A training crystal rose from its shelf and began to rotate slowly. A practice mat rolled itself up and floated in lazy circles. A water cup drifted upward and hung suspended like it was filled with helium instead of liquid. Jiwan opened his eyes and gasped. The objects were still floating, and he could feel them, connected to his mind by invisible threads of energy. He was not even concentrating hard. It felt as natural as breathing or walking. He thought about making the objects move in patterns, and they obeyed, forming perfect circles and spirals in the air around him. By the 7 moons of Vextari, what are you doing? Professor Yuki stood in the doorway, her tentacle arms frozen in shock and her bioluminescent spots flashing so rapidly they looked like a strobe light. Her usually calm expression had been replaced by something that looked like panic. The floating objects crashed to the floor as Jiwan's concentration broke. He scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment. I am sorry, Professor. I could not sleep, and I thought I would. Practice the meditation exercises you taught us. I did not mean to break anything. Professor Yuki moved into the room slowly, like she was approaching a dangerous animal. Her spots had stopped flashing, but they were glowing much brighter than usual. She picked up the training crystal and examined it carefully, checking for damage. Jiwan, how long have you been practicing meditation? Since yesterday when you taught us the basics. And you have never done telekinesis before? I have never done anything like this before. We do not have psionic abilities on Earth, Professor, at least not that anyone knows about. Professor Yuki set down the crystal and stared at him. Her alien features made it hard to read her expressions, but she looked like someone who had just watched gravity start working backwards. What you just demonstrated should be impossible for a beginning student. Even our most gifted children from naturally psionic species require weeks of practice to achieve basic object manipulation. You were maintaining control over multiple items simultaneously while in a meditative state. She moved closer, and Jiwan could see his reflection in her large dark eyes. Show me again. Jiwan hesitated. Are you sure I do not want to break anything important? Show me, she repeated. Jiwan closed his eyes and felt for that flowing energy. It was still there waiting for him like an old friend. He reached out with his mind and gently lifted the training crystal. The water cup followed then, the practice mat soon. A dozen small objects were dancing through the air in complex patterns that seemed to create themselves. Enough, Professor Yuki whispered. But Jiwan was already opening his eyes. The objects settled gently back to their places. Without a sound, Professor, Yuki was touching a communication device on her wrist. Master Kalors, I need you in practice hall 7 immediately. We have a situation. Within minutes, the massive crystal form of Master Kalors filled the doorway. He looked around the room, taking in the scattered objects and Professor Yuki's expression of shocked confusion. What is the nature of this situation? Professor, the human has achieved intermediate-level telekinetic control after 1 day of basic instruction. Master, Kalors turned his glowing eyes toward Jiwan. The young human felt like an insect being examined by a giant. Demonstrate. Master Kalors commanded. For the 3rd time that morning, Jiwan closed his eyes and reached for the flowing energy. This time, he felt something different. The energy was stronger, more responsive. It seemed to be growing each time he used it. He lifted not just small objects but larger ones. The practice mats rose into the air and began to weave themselves into complex patterns. A rack of training weapons lifted as a single unit and rotated slowly. Several water containers floated upward and began to pour their contents into spiraling streams that flowed through the air without spilling a drop. Impossible, Master Kalors. Breathed. Jiwan opened his eyes and saw both aliens staring at him with expressions of awe and fear. The floating display continued for several more seconds before gently settling back to normal positions. How are you doing this, young human? Jiwan thought about the question carefully. He had been wondering the same thing himself. When I think about my sister, Mina, everything becomes clear, he said finally. I can feel her across all that distance, and when I focus on reaching her, the energy just flows where it needs to go. It does not feel like I am learning something new. It feels like I am remembering something I already knew but had forgotten. Master Kahlers and Professor Yuki exchanged a look that seemed to carry entire conversations. This level of rapid development is unprecedented in our records, Professor Yuki said. Most students require months to achieve basic stability with simple telekinesis. You are demonstrating advanced techniques that we typically do not teach until the third year of study. Is that bad? Ji-won asked. Master Kahlers moved closer, his crystal features reflecting the morning light in sharp fragments. It could be very dangerous, young human. The mind is not meant to develop psionic abilities this rapidly. The neural pathways need time to adapt to increased energy flow. Rush the process and you could suffer permanent damage or worse. But my sister, I understand your urgency, but you must proceed with caution. We have seen promising students destroy themselves by pushing too hard too fast. The power you are displaying could easily burn out your neural systems if you lose control. Ji-won nodded, but inside he felt the flowing energy pulsing stronger with each passing moment. Something was happening. To him, something that felt bigger than just learning a new skill. It felt like his entire mind was changing, becoming something it had always been meant to be. We will need to modify your training schedule, Professor Yuki said. You clearly cannot continue with the basic classes, but advancing you too quickly could be fatal. We must find a balance. Master Kahlers was still staring at Ji-won with those glowing eyes. Tell me, human, what do you know of your species' evolutionary history? The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Ji-won answered as best he could. We evolved from earlier primates. We survived through adaptation and intelligence, rather than physical strength. We learned to use tools and work together to overcome challenges that should have killed us. Adaptation. Master Kahlers repeated the word slowly. Yes, that might explain it. Every other species in the galaxy developed psionic abilities over millions of years through gradual evolutionary processes, but humans. He paused. Humans evolved to adapt rapidly to survive impossible situations. Perhaps your neural architecture is fundamentally different. Perhaps what we see as dangerous rapid development is simply how human consciousness naturally operates, Professor Yuki. Tentacles writhed nervously. If that is true, then everything we know about safe psionic training may not apply to his species. We could be looking at abilities that develop at rates we have never encountered. Ji-won felt a chill run down his spine. The way they were talking made it sound like he was some kind of experiment or maybe something dangerous that needed to be contained. Am I in trouble? He asked. Master Kahlers' expression softened slightly. No, young human, you are not in trouble, but you may be something far more significant than any of us realized. We must proceed very carefully from this point forward, for your safety and perhaps for the safety of everyone around you. As the morning progressed, word of the human students, impossible, progress began to spread throughout the academy. Other students whispered in the corridors. Instructors gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Advanced students who had spent years mastering basic techniques found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about psionic development. And in Practice Hall 7, Ji-won continued to meditate, feeling the energy flow through him like a river that was slowly but steadily becoming an ocean.